Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. This is our June Pave the Way virtual Washington Student Achievement Council monthly webinar series. My name is Heather Hudson. I'll be your host today. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning here at the Washington Student Achievement Council. And today's Pave the Way session is about guided pathways, redesigning college to increase equity and persistence in completion rates. For those of you that are attending your first Pave the Way session, Pave the Way is an annual state conference that the Washington Student Achievement Council hosts to increase learning, particularly around equity-focused student success and to increase our post-secondary attainment rate. During the pandemic year, we've transitioned to a monthly webinar series. So I will ask Crystal to go to the next slide and we'll give a quick rundown of our agenda for the day. So I will give just a brief overview of the Washington Student Achievement Council and how guided pathways fit into our state's post-secondary attainment goal before handing it off to Davis Jenkins, our keynote speaker, to present on redesigning community colleges for equitable access and success, lessons from 6 years of research on guided pathways reforms in Washington state and nationally. After the presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A from all of you, and then we will go into a panel discussion and Q&A with some of our fabulous guests today. Before I jump into a little bit more about WASAC, quick few logistics. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website following today's session. We encourage all of you to ask questions throughout the session. You can add in questions in the Q&A at any time, and we will do our best to get to your questions. We have over 300 people that registered for today, so we won't have a lot of time for everybody to talk, but we want to encourage everybody to use that chat function for engagement. And then if there are questions that we don't get to, we will do our best to follow up with you afterwards with our guests and speakers. So next slide, Crystal. Before we jump into talking about guided pathways, just a few notes about the Washington Student Achievement Council for those of you that aren't familiar with us. We often go by WASAC. WASAC is a 9-member cabinet level council representing K-12 and higher education sectors, as well as governor appointed citizen members. We have a few priority work in our agency. We focus on policy and research, looking at what is the best practice, what is the evidence out there on increasing post-secondary attainment. We offer some programs around college savings and financial aid, including the Washington College Grant and the College Bound Scholarship. We also offer some programs that help increase college access and support for K-12 and returning adult students, as well as some consumer protection programs like our student loan advocate. Next slide. And when you are listening to the presentation today, I'll encourage you all to think about this. Washington has a post-secondary attainment goal. It has been adopted by our council and many other leaders throughout the state that at least 70% of Washington adults will have some form of a post-secondary credential. And yet currently, Washington adults ages 25 to 44, about half do not have a post-secondary degree. And you can see from this chart that the gap between current attainment levels and the statewide goal is much larger for our Black, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic, and American Indian, Alaska Native people in Washington compared to their white and Asian peers. So we'll ground ourselves in this goal and where we are headed and what we need to do to get there when we think about the work of guided pathways. Next slide. And for the Washington Student Achievement Council, the way that we and our council have been focused on increasing post-secondary attainment is through this strategic framework with a focus on equity throughout. We recognize that in order to get more students into post-secondary education, we need to make it affordable. We need to ensure that students have removed barriers and that the access is easy. So for K-12 and returning adults, increasing that enrollment, addressing basic needs and other student supports like mental health, and addressing student mobility that enables students to persist and complete and earn that credential. And throughout all of this, our council has adopted not only an equity definition, but an equity statement that really grounds and guides this work that is focused particularly on our folks of color in Washington State. So with that in mind, I'm thrilled to announce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Davis Jenkins. Davis Jenkins is a senior research scholar at the Community College Research Center and research professor in education and social policy analysis at Columbia University's Teachers College. He works with colleges, schools, community groups, and employers in communities and states across the country to find ways to improve educational and employment outcomes for students from groups that have been poorly served by the U.S. educational system. Together with Thomas Bailey and Shauna Yagers, he co-authored Redesigning America's Community Colleges, A Clearer Path to Student Success, which has helped to catalyze a national guided pathways whole college reform movement. For the past 6 years, Jenkins has led research involving over 100 colleges nationally on the implementation of pathways reforms and their effects on student outcomes and college performance. His recent publications include Funding Guided Pathways, a guide for community college leaders, and the Dual Enrollment Playbook, a guide to equitable acceleration for students. Jenkins earned a PhD in public policy analysis from Carnegie Mellon University and a bachelor's in religion from Princeton University. So I am so honored and thrilled to have Davis here to present on guided pathways and really share both nationally and here in Washington, what are we learning and how can we understand the opportunities and the challenges for Washington State, given the incredible investments that our state has made in guided pathways? Where are we at now and what work do we have to do to ensure that more students and more students of color can persist and earn those credentials? So with that, Davis, I will hand it off to you.
Thanks, Heather. It's an honor to be here. I wish I were out there in person. I see you even let some of our Oregon friends in this. So I wish I were out there rather than sitting in sweltering Chicago. I just want to, as Heather was saying, talk about some of what we've learned over the last 6 years as we've looked at guided pathways in Washington, Oregon, and many other parts of the country, and particularly what it's taught us about how to improve equitable access and success for students. Part of this is to consider the context, which right now is COVID has been hard on all of us, but it's been particularly hard on community colleges and their students. This is out today. I think it's a preview of a clearinghouse report that was in the Chronicle today of change over the previous spring enrollments by age, the darker blues 18 to 24 and the lighter blues older students. And you can see community college students this spring, as this past fall, lost a lot of students compared to four-year institutions. It was heavily concentrated across the students who didn't show up were heavily concentrated among lower income students and students of color, although the declines in enrollment by low income students and students of color was much greater proportionally in community colleges than it was in 4 years. Really disturbing is the decline over this past year in enrollment by recent high school graduates, which is really problematic for the future. We're losing momentum. But in Washington State and throughout most of the country, community colleges have been declining for the last decade. If you start on the right, this is enrollment in Washington higher ed institutions based on iPads in 2018, up to 2018-19. We're looking at fall enrollments, so full year enrollments are larger. The blue line is community colleges. Again, this is Washington State. The red line is the public 4 years, and the green is the private not-for-profits. And as you can see, enrollment among older students in Washington State community colleges has been tanking. That gray line was the Great Recession for a long time. Community colleges will say that this is partly due to the strong labor market pre-COVID, and that certainly had part of it, but there are other issues, we think, which we'll talk about. Not as well noticed maybe is that in Washington and throughout the country, community colleges have been losing market share, especially to the public regional 4 years and among traditional age students. And they have been ramping up very much on dual enrollment students, which I'll talk about as well. So community college enrollment has been declining for a long time, and this is an issue. Compounding the enrollment problems with community colleges is that they lose a lot of their students. Most of their students don't complete at the college. These are the most recent 6-year highest outcomes for students who start at public 2-year institutions. And nationally, 6 years later, among students who start at community colleges, 40% have earned either a community college credential or a credential from a 4-year institution. Washington State is a little bit above the average. 43% have earned a community college credential or a bachelor's degree. 14%, almost 1 in 7 students, is still enrolled 6 years later. Nationally, the rate is 19%, still enrolled 6 years later. I want to hire all those students, by the way. Those students have grit. And then many students, unfortunately, have dropped out. Now, the rates for Washington public 4 years, which are actually about close to the national average, are higher than this. I want to emphasize that research has suggested that really what distinguishes the biggest factor in the differential we see between public 4 years and community colleges is the difference in per student funding. So community colleges are working with fewer resources. But the question is, how can they better take advantage of their resources, particularly because not only do we have an output problem, completion problem overall, but it's especially unsatisfactory for students of color and low-income students and older students. These are the national figures, but again, I wanted to use the national figures because they're the most authoritative and allow state by state, but Washington's pretty much the same. Nationally, only about 10%, in Washington it's probably 9 or 10% of African-American students who start in a community college get a bachelor's degree within 6 years. And as you can see, many students of those African-American students still enroll after 6 years. We've done research throughout the country, and this is an overcomplicated slide based on some research that we did recently in Washington that looks at the effects of gaining early momentum, earning a substantial number of credits early on, and passing key foundation or gateway courses early on students' propensity to complete a degree at a community college and to transfer and complete a bachelor's degree. So if you look at the top right, you'll see that for all students, students who gain, compared to students who don't gain, who don't earn 12 or more college credits, these are semester credits, so you have to translate that, Washington, into quarters. More than 1.5 times the rate of those who earn 12 or more credits in their first year, college credits, are 1.7 times more likely to complete either a community college credential or transfer and get a bachelor's degree. You'll see, though, the effects for minority students, Black and Hispanic students, as well as low income, of gaining early momentum are especially strong. So once we get minority students, once they're able to get some early momentum, especially in a program of study, they do really well. But the problem, of course, is that too many students generally, and far too many students of color, low-income students, first-gen students, are dropping out early on. This is the pattern in Washington, but we see this throughout the country. This looks at the enrollment of students by their program over 2 years, 8 quarters. And you'll see this gray area, which is students who are not enrolled anywhere, not in another community college, not transferred to a 4-year, and also not completed. So you'll see by year 2, almost half of students overall haven't returned for that second fall, the fall of their second year, first quarter of their second year. And the number for students of color, especially African American, but also Hispanic students, is almost 60%. So we're losing over half. Now, some of those will return, but we know that keeping on, getting early momentum, but also consistency of enrollment is really important. Despite the rising cost of even a community college education, and Washington has tried to keep tuition down, I would say it's probably in the mid to high levels, about $4,200 per year for full-time enrollment for tuition and fees. Of course, doesn't include books and other expenses. But many credentials that community colleges in Washington and elsewhere are offering don't have strong labor market returns. This is a tree map of all the credentials awarded by Washington State community colleges in 2018-19 based on IPEDS. The 29%, when you look down the lower right, the gray ones are short-term certificates. The orange ones are longer-term certificates of a year or more. The blue associate degrees, the green bachelor's, and this grayish color, which I really like. I love gray, especially dark gray, are these postdoc or post-associate degree credentials. Generally, although there's a lot of variation, we find that by themselves, not the short-term credentials don't have strong labor market value by themselves. If you can stack them into a longer-term credential, and especially a degree, they do have, it is strong because employers are looking for degrees plus skills, but too many students don't get degrees. And increasingly, in general, we're seeing that the returns to bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees continue to be strong, while the value of sub-baccalaureate credentials has stagnated. On the left is from a study by Anthony Carnevale of the education level of workers with in prime working age with good jobs, that is 35 grand or older for younger workers. The blue line is workers who have at least a bachelor's or a graduate degree. The red line, as you can see, is people with a community college credential, certificate, or associate degree. Most of those have an associate degree, especially an applied associate. And the yellow line is people with just a high school diploma. The other graph shows even more detailed by education level. And the three groups that have not gained real earnings, their earnings haven't recovered since the early 2000s, since before the Great Recession, are men and women with some college and men with bachelor's degrees. So we think this has a bearing on, given the cost of education, what is the return to community college degrees? Transfer associate degrees are valuable only if the student is able to apply them toward a bachelor's in their field of interest. And nationally, too many students aren't able to transfer their credits toward a field of interest. And in Washington and nationally, these generic associate degrees, which are General Associate of Arts degrees, which in Washington are called DTAs, which is this is looking at the field in which associate and bachelor's degrees are awarded by community colleges in Washington on the top and public 4-years below. And you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, 55% of the associate degrees in Washington are in these generic Associate of Arts DTAs, which don't align with essentially the majors of the awards given by Washington 4-year public institutions. And, we call them liberal arts and sciences, but these tend to be more the generic, mix of 90 credits We find we've done a lot of research showing that doesn't enable students, prepare them to transfer effectively with junior standing in a major. Here's some evidence to that effect. This is looking at the median credits earned by students who started at a community college in Washington and earned a substantial number of credits at the community college, then transferred to a public or private four-year degree in the state by the type of the degree that they earn, compared on the right hand to students who entered a public four-year directly. So you see this Associate of Science, which is a structured transfer degree, students are earning 201 credits. The median student, that means half students earn more than that, compared to 194 for direct entry students. Associate of Arts students are having to take a lot more credits to get a bachelor's in STEM, 218 degrees, the median. So we're putting up a lot of roadblocks for students, especially by not helping them think about here's similar for business. And we also find that many students who get the DTA, this is the second bar from the left, of the students who earn a DTA from a Washington Community College, 64% transfer, but more than a third don't transfer within a reasonable amount of time, within 2 years. So they're essentially leaving cards on the table. They've proved that they can succeed. So we really, in the work that we done at CCRC, in this book I wrote with Tom Bailey and Shauna Jaggers, tried to look at this problem of why despite huge reform efforts in community colleges, we're not seeing substantial improvements in student outcomes. And basically we argue, although it's a bit of a caricature, that community colleges were designed for low-cost access, which is what we wanted community colleges to do in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But in this sort of cafeteria model, which is a bit of a caricature, students, they're not well designed to help students choose and enter a program and complete a program that's aligned with good jobs and transfer to a major. The program paths to good jobs and transfer in a major aren't clear. New students aren't helped to explore interests and develop a plan. Student progress isn't monitored, and too few students experience active and learning on topics of interest to them, especially early on in their tenure at the college. And so guided pathways is not interventions per se, it's a framework for redesigning college for access and success, starting with the end in mind, where the end is careers and further education leading to economic and social mobility. This involves colleges really fundamentally rethinking how they clarify the paths to student end goals, how they help students get on a path, keep students on path, and ensure that they're learning not just in discrete courses, but across their programs. And this has led to a national movement. There are 400 colleges involved in formal national and state initiatives, and Washington has been a leader on this. Washington, California have invested state money directly in this, and many others are doing this without direct funding for colleges. We've been tracking the progress of 120 colleges in these various states nationally, including all colleges in Washington, Tennessee, Ohio, and many in California and other states. And our thinking about how to improve student outcomes has evolved from this research in these key ways. A lot of colleges doing guided pathways have organized programs into meta majors, improved the information on their websites about programs and program outcomes. That's very important, but we find that sometimes it doesn't change the student experience, and it's not going to change the student experience unless just by putting better information out. The student experience is going to change if students are helped to enter an academic and career community and help to develop an individualized plan that they can see and that the college and their advisors and faculty can monitor their progress on. A lot of colleges have really improved career and transfer information advising from the front. But as much as this is important, just as important has to be conversations with students and connecting them. What are you interested in, Davis? Do you want to work with people? Do you like to work with drones? Are you interested in marketing? You should go talk to Professor Hudson. So it's really these conversations and connections as much as the information and assessment. We've done a lot of research, and others have, on this co-requisite remediation based on multiple measures placement, which means you provide the support for students, especially in math and English, at the same time as the college level course, and you use college grades for placement. Our research suggests that model is effective, but it's mainly effective because it helps students avoid prerequisite remediation. And in mathematics, it's mainly effective because when the math is aligned with students' programs of study. So there's increasingly strong evidence, including experimental evidence, that co-requisite works to help students succeed in math and college math and English. But the research on other subject areas is much more mixed. And we've done research showing math and English aren't the only gateway courses, that matter for graduation. Anatomy and physiology, accounting 101, American civilization, social 101 are also important. And we need to beef up the teaching in those courses as well. So there's lots of research showing holistic advising works, but the question is how you do this in a community college, and colleges, with very few resources for advising and counseling, and colleges have done this by organizing programs by meta major and embedding advisors in their program areas, working with faculty, teaching faculty in those areas, and scheduling and monitoring progress based on students' plans. In terms of the on-ramp from, we didn't say much in Redesigning America's Community Colleges about connection to high school or adult learning program, but we've since done research, including this recent study that Heather mentioned, in which we looked at 3 states, of which Washington was one, at colleges and high schools that together are achieving strong college, not just success in dual enrollment courses like Running Start, but are enabling students of color, Black, Latinx, Native American, Pacific Islander to enter college or university directly and succeed in their first year. And most of these colleges that we identified by the numbers, in other words, looking at outcomes of dual enrollment students of color, not just succeeding, getting access to dual enrollment, but going on directly to a college or university and succeeding in the first year, we're early guided pathways adopters like Pierce College in Washington State, Wenatchee Valley in working with rural students. And really to advance, they're implementing lots of practices, but what's really key is their mindset of these institutions. This is, I'm going to talk about dual enrollment, but really this applies more generally to all our college programs and not just in community colleges. In the traditional Running Start model, Running Start courses are made available to students who are already college bound, and that's reinforced by having to take scientifically unsupported tests and racially biased tests, which our research has shown are not predictive of students' success. Moving from that to actively reaching out to underserved students, schools, and their communities to tell them about the advantage, a huge advantage of Running Start. Focusing, instead of focusing on students' academic preparedness, especially as based on bogus standardized tests, the focus also, in addition to academics, is on students' motivation, advising them, helping them explore and connect with people on campus and develop a full program plan while in high school. And even if they change that plan, which they probably will once they get into college or post-high school, it has enormous advantages for students to see what they have to do and to motivate them. Instead of offering just gen ed courses, which is good for middle-class students so that they can enter college having gotten these prereqs out of the way and take interesting courses, colleges are looking and working with schools to offer program foundation courses. And instead of just focusing on academic content standards, which AP, for example, focuses on, I'm not knocking AP, but the results of AP and the access are very inequitable, even more so than dual enrollment. The focus has to be on providing access to good teaching, to help students become confident as college learners. There's a huge equity issue in students taking high school career technical programs, which traditionally have focused on post-high school employment. That's good, but given the data I showed earlier on the increasingly returns to degrees, we have to help students not only align their programs not only with good jobs, a job post-high school, again, which is important, but also with degrees in fields of economic opportunity. So it's a very complicated reform. Over the past couple of years, we've really focused colleges, because they lose so many students early on the onboarding process and rethinking onboarding from onboarding into college and registering for your first term classes to really onboarding into a program and an academic and career community. And these are the kinds of design principles that we're advocating, and we think colleges need to find ways to do, not just to retain more students, but to retain more students of color, low-income students, and other underserved students, because these are precisely the kinds of supports that privileged students like our children get in school and out of school, but that underserved students, regardless of their talent, and they're generally not considered based on talent, are really not provided in school and aren't in families that can provide these kind of resources. So ask every student about their interests, what they're good about, what they're good at, what they see themselves doing, and then connecting them to people, faculty, other students, programs in field of interest, inspiring them through first-term courses in topics of relevance, and this doesn't have to be, a major specific course. It could be a humanities course, a social 101 course. We've all had 101 courses that have lit the fire, and we've all had 101 courses that have dampened the fire for learning. And especially for equity, this is really important. And if we don't help every student develop a full program plan by the end of their first term, which they may change, and many students do, but we find that it helps students navigate, and early changes are fine, later changes are better. Unless we provide every student with a plan, and this is for all of higher ed, including our dual enrollment students, we shouldn't be taking their money or the taxpayers' money. So these are the kinds of design principles that we think are really, we need to double down on, and you'll hear some of this from our colleagues in Washington about how they're doing this. We've seen promising descriptive evidence among early adopters. We're in terms of early momentum, graduation rates, decrease in excess credits, transfer success, perceived program value, and COVID responsiveness. If every student has an advisor in their program area and they're on a plan that they can see online, it was much easier to register for courses this past year than if we don't know, where students are in their program and they don't have a program-specific advisor. We see improvements in outcomes for students overall and students of color and low-income students, but gaps remain. And this is a critical issue, and why we think we need to work on those, onboarding, especially with students before they get to college through dual enrollment. and connections with schools. We have done research on the costs, which the largest cost is increasing advising to provide case management advisors by college, and we estimate for the average college this adds about 3% of additional costs per year to operating budgets. And we're seeing colleges using grant money and money from like the state to get started up. But really what they're doing is reorganizing and reallocating and reassigning more than increasing tuition or using grant dollars to pay for these changes. And part of this is a mindset change from attracting students by offering low-cost college courses to attracting and retaining students by offering high-quality, affordable programs that lead to good jobs and transfer with junior standing in a major, and reaching out to students who, in the past, we've excluded using standardized tests and other, scientifically unsupported means by race and income rather than by talent and by drive. Stopping that practice, which is obviously racist and classist, but it's also bad business. And we're turning away students who have the talent and the drive to succeed. All of the recent Aspen Prize winners and finalists, including Pierce College this year, among Washington, the 10 finalists are early pathways pioneers. And I know my friend Tomas will get at this, but we know policymakers want to see changes quickly, and we do need to, the equity imperative, the enrollment imperative, the economic development imperative is strong, but this is a long process, and it involves laying the groundwork because this involves more than just major practice changes and technical changes, which are heady, but really changes in mindset about what students are capable of and how we can support them. So it takes a long time, it takes money, it takes courageous leadership, and this can't be done by community colleges alone. The 4 years have a role in this, which I didn't talk enough about, and we also need to work with the K-12 schools, reaching down from higher education and expanding access instead of limiting it through unsupported ways that we have, to really expand the pool of students, not only ready, but motivated to go to college and who have a plan that they will probably change, but have a direction, and they've got the momentum. So I hope that was useful. Please add any questions or rebuttals in the chat. If I can't answer them or whatever in the chat, Heather and company will forward them to me. But I think probably a good idea, unless there are any major ones. And again, I'm open to rebuttals and critiques. I work in New York and I live in Chicago, so this is how we say we love you. You guys out there are very nice. I know that. So.
Thank you, Davis. That was so much rich information. I will just pause for a moment and check with Crystal. I think there was at least one question. Crystal, can you help me pull that question up for Davis?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was from Tracy Costa. She asked, what does low income mean in your presentation? Does it include the working class and lower middle class? The older student population may fall under these economic classes, and there is value in collecting data to identify the resources they need.
Absolutely. So in our work in Washington, we've been able, working with the Washington State Board, to match student address records, which we don't have, to census tract information. And low income means people who are in the lower 2 quintiles of the family earnings based on the local latest current population survey data. But you're really right that there's a big interaction with, definitely with age, older students, I mean, you know, look at the labor market, how it's changed for older students, and I think this is why you're seeing big drop off for older students, as well as race. So we do have to look at that. And fortunately, the state board has focused both on race and income, I think, more than any other state we've worked in, and they have the data to do this.
All right, Crystal, was there any other questions from the audience or any audience members now? If you have a question for Davis, please put it in the Q&A. And if we don't get to it, oh, I see them all coming in now. So we'll take,
okay, but
we'll take one more question, Crystal, if you can help pull up one more question, and then we'll integrate these into the panel discussion.
Right on.
Perfect. I see from Joe Wild, I see numbers for the binary population, male, female. Are there any considerations for increasing equity for those that identify otherwise?
I think this is a good question for the panel. We don't have data on that, but we have, in our work in Washington State, we've seen a bigger emphasis on non-binary populations than we have anywhere else in the country, and we work all over the place. So it's incredibly important. These kind of data that I'm presenting tell you that there's a problem. They don't tell you the solution. The solution has to happen. We're just providing some design parameters based on research about how you might approach it. But the solution happens locally, as you'll hear from our panel, and it's got to involve students too. And we've seen great success in colleges on the undertaking, and actually those that have succeeded best have done so by engaging students like the ones you're going to hear from now in that discussion.
Okay, I have to include one more question because I also selfishly want to know what your response is.
You're such a nerd. Okay.
Sorry, one more question for you, Davis. What is your recommendation for short-term certificates offered by continuing education? What is the future of short-term certificates?
We don't recruit those students. In Washington, we've looked at these data. These are students who have, skills, and they often are working for employers who would pay for their education. We don't recruit them into credit programs. So, I go to so many colleges, not just in Washington, they have robust non-credit workforce, but they aren't shown the path to a degree. And those programs, however, need to be offered the way the best continuing ed are, on the schedule and through media and with teaching appropriate for working adults who've always had a lot of challenges, but especially in the past year have been accentuated. So we're also, Washington iBest is based on work I did in Chicago and Detroit. We're also not actively recruiting adult basic skills students. We have a very robust infrastructure for that in Washington. And what I'm also saying is there are a lot of low-income minority students who are in middle schools and high schools in Washington, who are in CTE programs, who have drive and talent, and we're just sorting them out. And it's bad the worst is that we're wasting human potential and sorting people by race and class rather than talent. But it's, again, we got to stop doing it. It's bad for business.
All right, thank you, Davis. I know
Here
there's
endeth my sermon.
There's more questions, but I want to make sure
okay,
we reserve time for our
just send me an email.
So we will hold all of those questions. You can please keep putting your questions in for Davis, but I'm going to ask our panelists to put their video on as I introduce them. And I'm going to start with Sierra Bray. Sierra is a Guided Pathways Student Fellow. She is studying at Cascadia College to earn a BA of Applied Sciences in Sustainable Practices. Sierra has been learning about the intersectionality of being a steward for the planet and our people, and is excited to be a part of the panel to discuss the student experience as well as the Guided Pathways Fellowship. We also have Maggie Harada. She's a Senior Associate Professor of English and a co-lead of the Guided Pathways work at Bellevue College. Maggie has been a community college educator in Washington State for 20 years. During her time at Bellevue College, she has had several different roles, including tenured English faculty, professional development coordinator, department chair, and arts and humanities dean. Next, we have Allison King, professor of biology and co-lead of guided pathways at Bellevue College. Allison is a professor of biology and has been serving as the co-lead for pathways with Meg Hirata for the last 2 years. Previous to her roles at Bellevue College, Allison has taught biology at various colleges in the state, including University of Washington, Seattle, Bothell campuses, North and South colleges. Next, we have Jade Kunwii Rokay. She is also a Guided Pathways Student Fellow. Jade is in her 3rd year as a college student, community organizer, and advocate, and daughter Pacific Islander. She has graduated from North Seattle College and was recently accepted into the University of Washington. Congratulations, Jade, to begin focusing this fall in 2021 on psychology. Next, we have Tomas Ibarra. He's the Executive Vice President at Yakima Valley College. Tomas served as Program Specialist for Chicano Education at the Washington State Board for Community College Education, served on Board of Directors of the Council for Educational Opportunity while directing the TRIO Upward Bound program for Evergreen State College. And I'm going to embarrass Tomas today because this is Tomas's last day as he begins to celebrate his retirement. And so I just would ask everybody to do a reaction in Zoom as we all celebrate Tomas and his long service to the state of Washington and students. Thank you, Tomas, for your service and happy day of retirement. Thank you for celebrating your retirement with us this morning. So as you can see, we have an incredible panel. And we actually now only have 40 minutes. So I'm going to just jump right in and start with our students. Sierra and Jade, you know, we just heard a ton of information from Davis around the data, around systems, and what do we need to do at a high level. And I would love for you both to ground us in your experience as students. Can you tell us what your reaction is to that information and really what has been your experience as a student? You know, for example, how many colleges have you both been to, and what has that been like for you to move between colleges to figure out what your pathway is? And you know, I'll start with you, Jade, and ask that you both kind of share the time in responding to this question.
Thanks, Heather, for having me go first, and thanks everyone for coming and being a part of this. It's really such an honor to be even considered as a panelist for this. I have attended 2 community colleges so far. I say so far, but my intent is to transfer to UW. And I can say that my college experience, especially at Shoreline, was really rigorous because I was a full-time student. You know, I didn't really have like another job, and I noticed that I excelled really strongly at Shoreline. And then when things kind of fell on my personal life to, you know, take responsibility for my finances, I found that I struggled a lot. So I ended up transferring to North Seattle to kind of find an easier way to combine school with like a work and professional career. And that's shaped my involvement in my education to be something very different from what it was when I first started. So I wouldn't have been here and even on this panel if I hadn't gone through that transfer kind of situation from Shoreline to North Seattle. And even still, like all I can see is just like the opportunities ahead of me with all of the struggle and baggage that came with it. But yeah, Sierra, I don't know, what was your experience going from a 4-year to a 2-year? Because I know that that's probably pretty different.
Yeah, I have a really crazy story about my college experience, but I just wanted to point out that I saw my high school advisor is here today. So hi, Scott. Super crazy. You're still one of the best advisors I've ever had. So Yeah, I'm not shocked by the information that was presented today. It honestly kind of just solidifies the way students feel already. The system is not working the way we need it to. And so, yeah, I actually originally went to WSU, Washington State University, which is a 4-year university. And I ended up dropping out of that. Yeah, go Cougs. And I went to Spokane Falls Community College because at WSU, I was having a really hard time figuring out where I wanted to go in life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, I was just doing what I was told to do by my parents, by society. And I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. So I went to Spokane Falls Community College, which they had a Pullman branch. So I stayed in Pullman with all of my friends. But it did not, I still was lacking that passion. I didn't know where I was going. I was just kind of taking all of these credits, and I had like 100 and something credits under my belt that you know, weren't going towards anything specific. And then I found Cascadia College, and transferring there was one of the easier transfers that I made, because they're they're just so open and willing to help their students, and it's a lot more personable than Washington State University, which 4-year colleges have so many more issues, which is why I love that we look at all of this on the community college level, because it creates a community and it really helps you, you know, go forward with what you want to do. Like how Jade is going into UW, like she was accepted, like you're going, like that's so amazing, you know. And it's like, what would your life have been like if you hadn't had all of these steps up until now? And these opportunities, like through guided pathways, it was so cool. And so yeah, I had a I couldn't transfer all of my credits from WSU. When I transferred into Cascadia College, they could only take up to a certain amount of credits, and so I probably have about 60 credits that mean nothing to my degree once I get it. So yeah, that's my college experience.
And just to wrap, we will have more time to come back to you, but Jade, tell us more about what you're excited to do now that you're ready to start at UW, and how is this experience at a community college prepared you?
That's a pretty tricky question, because I just got finished answering like a question in the Q&A that I felt really strongly about, which was shared by Melissa Ziegler, and we were talking about the AAGTA effectiveness, and that's actually the degree that I have. I received it in fall of 2020, so during the pandemic is when I got my degree, and I've been in community college for almost 4 years now, which was not, you know, that's not really what people tell you when you start community college. They'll think, oh, you're going to be there for 2 years and then you're going to go straight to transfer. And I was there for a lot longer than I thought I was going to be there. And most of my motivations and inspiration for continuing my education did not come from my classes or my courses. It came from my student organizations. It came from the friends I made. It came from the relationships with professors, instructors, and advisors that like really pushed me to continue to succeed. And at community colleges, the culture of a college is different. It's not what you would expect. It's not the narrative that we get as you would with a 4-year, with like legacy and tradition. Community colleges are meant to serve a population that maybe hasn't even considered college up until being like, okay, well, I can afford community college, so let's like try it out. I paid for my first year of community college after working in the job force for like 4 years after I graduated high school. I did not go immediately from high school to college at all. I didn't even think I would be accepted into any 4-year. So community college was like, oh, I guess. And I remember when I was in high school, because this was something that Davis talked about a lot in his presentation, the opportunity to do a dual track enrollment as a high school student and a college student. And I had freshly moved here from out of state. I moved here from Detroit in 2010. and ended up graduating high school here in Washington. That would have made my life so different. I would be in such a different place. I would have so many different experiences if I had known that, first that community college, like administration and professors and just, the state was so supportive of having these initiatives and of, students like me who didn't really think that college was an option. And also that, that these measures were being put in place and that they have been in place for so long. I wouldn't be here without the Guided Pathways Fellowship either. So I'm gonna just give a quick shout out to the Ideal Pathways, because that was a life-changing program for me. The opportunity to get applicable experience and the kind of work I wanted to do, to be like equity focused, to honestly get a paid opportunity while I was in school. I still work full time. I have 2 jobs and I'm still enrolled as a full-time college student. Like that's just a reality for me and many of my peers. So I think that, if community college can really partner with a student and build more of a student decision-making process where we can have more control over our educational pathway, I think that would be so beneficial for me and for like my friends and for friends that I'm trying to get to go to college. Like, hey, it's going to be really good for you, even though I know you don't believe me, kind of a deal,
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you so much, Jade and Sierra. We will come back to you. I'm gonna shift to Tomas. Tomas, you've been working on implementing guided pathways from the bottom up for over 10 years now. Can you share from your experience, what have you seen at Yakima Valley Community College since implementing guided pathways? Have you seen increased persistence and completion rates for students and students of color? And what have you learned?
Yes, thank you. I'll be glad to try to address that as concisely as possible. I know that we're limited on time now, but I just want to express appreciation for being invited to be a part of this conversation, especially to be on a panel with 2 so thoughtful and competent students. I think that the inspiration that we get from hearing from such capable students about their personal stories is something we need to spend more time focusing on. But I'll just say that in response to Davis's presentation, 2 questions really occurred to me. One was, what's the experience like for those of us who attempt institution scale reform as practitioners? And 2, are there any significant measurable differences that we can ascribe to adopting the principles of guided pathways? And the answer to those questions are, first, it depends, and second, yes. It depends entirely, I think, on the context in which we're working, which includes location, history, college culture, the key participants, meaning the makeup of the student body, the makeup of the faculty, student services, instructional leadership, and staff. So I can share a little bit about what our experiences look like, but people shouldn't try to generalize from that. Your experience is going to be unique. I can tell you that we began our institutional reform movement more than 10 years ago. It actually began for Yakima Valley College about 2006. And it has continued in a stepwise fashion through those years. In the early part of those years, we became an Achieving the Dream College. And it was around that time that we first made our acquaintance with the CCRC, Davis and others in the CCRC, because we found them in the Achieving the Dream movement, and we found them again later on playing a prominent role as thought leaders in the Guided Pathways movement. But what we were experiencing at that time was, for the first time, mixing with thought leaders who were encouraging us to try to step outside of our lived reality as practitioners and critically examine what's behind our practice. And there was an early encouragement for us to think beyond experimenting with what we called boutique improvements, focusing on particular reform areas isolated in their own way within our institutions, and instead think about our institutions in a more systematic manner. And that voice, I think, was coming most strongly, most persistently from the CCRC. And it really has become magnified through their advocacy for guided pathways. The approach that we took at Yakima Valley College was not to attempt to apply leadership to addressing this challenge, but instead to draw out leadership from among the major stakeholders, foremost among whom were the instructional faculty, the counselors, the students' services and instructional leadership, and then the staff that they most heavily rely on a daily basis. So if there was a true role for leaders, it was to use that as our starting point and to take the responsibility of trying to help people to better understand the challenges facing us, which in the case of Yakima Valley College, we were experiencing a dramatic transformation in our student demographic. We transformed right around the turn of the century from being an historically, traditionally white institution to becoming a much more diverse institution. And now we are the most diverse college of any type in the state of Washington. We also have 71% Pell eligible students, so we serve students who face a lot of challenges in their lives. For us to aspire to have our major student outcomes track with system averages, that was really what we kind of aspired to in our early years, was just be average, because with the change in our demographic, we felt that that was really highly at risk. But we faced a couple of things that I think we all face, regardless of what kind of college we are and where we're located, because tradition has been what has placed us in the role of gatekeepers. And in many ways, Davis refers to this role in his presentation. And we needed to recognize that so that we could stop doing that, because we needed to address reforms that place students in the center of our attention and our priorities. And when we do that, that forces us to abandon that role of gatekeepers and interrogate our professional practice. Well, this feeling of a loss of autonomy, which is not imagined, it's very real, okay? And secondly, we face significant changes to the curriculum and schedules that result in a sense of loss on the part of faculty. Like, for example, in English at YVC, we had departmental faculty members who mourned the loss of their opportunity to teach their favorite lit course in favor of more badly needed developmental or composition courses. And again, this is not imagined loss, this is real loss. So people have to deal with those issues in the process of working together towards meaningful institutional change. But is there evidence that as we've gone through the process of implementing a series of reforms ranging from creating a new student onboarding process to questioning our placement practices, engaging in developmental reform, in gateway programs in English and mathematics and beyond, redesigning our advising system, placing students at the center, and on and on. Is there evidence that any of this has moved the needle? So we have been tracking outcomes that people in the state of Washington community and technical college system will find familiar, because they are best represented in our performance-based funding system called the Student Achievement Initiative. And it focuses on such things as retention, completion of core college requirements related to the degrees in communication and mathematics, looks at retention and ultimately looks at completion. And so the source for the data that we monitor on a consistent basis is the first time entering cohort database maintained by the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. And what I can tell you is that at YVC, we have begun the process of comparing two four-year cohorts. One that has been in place since we've taken guided pathways to scale at YVC, basically the year 2015 to the present, and then the previous cohort, which precedes taking guided pathways to scale. But it does encompass some of the early reforms that we implemented before we attacked our advising system, which is really a key to our success now. So just looking at retention, first year retention was high for us, and it got even higher. But it's retention into the second year, which was the greater challenge for us. Prior to guided pathways, it was at about 56%. It's now at about 58%. That doesn't seem like a tremendous significant change unless you consider the continuing change in our student demographic. But the systems average during that, at the present time, is about 53%. So at 58%, we're tracking above the system average, and our intention is to keep ratcheting that number up through our consistent effort. In terms of the communication requirement, this is probably one of our greatest achievements. We were, prior to guided pathways, at about 57%. Now 62% is among the leading outcomes in our system. The system average is right at about 53% for completing the communication requirement within a year. The quant requirement, we're right at about the average for our system of 39.5%. But we're just now beginning to implement a series of comprehensive reforms that were previously implemented with great success by our English department. So I couldn't be more excited to see this happening right at the moment when I'm finally retiring and leaving YVC, because I think that bodes so well for the success of our students. Our completion rates are also tracking consistently above system averages. Our 3-year completion rate prior to guided pathways was 31%. It's now 39%. Systems average is about 31% right now. Our 4-year completion rate prior to guided pathways was 38%. It's now 44%. The systems average is 34%. So just comparing the pre-guided pathways and the guided pathways 4-year cohorts, and then comparing our current outcomes to the system averages, we feel that we are on the right track. We're not a completed product by any stretch of the imagination. We're a college that is attempting to function as a learning institution and attempting, as we speak, a wholesale transformation in how we think about and how we approach the work that we do with one another and with our students. But I think the early data is promising. And when we track the gains compared with the system gains over the same period of time, consistently we see significant differences for YVC above system averages in every single one of these SAI indicators, with the sole exception being the quantitative requirement, at which we're right at the system's average. But when we just look internally and compare ourselves just to ourselves, not to anybody else, we also see a really meaningful trend because during the cohort years, white student graduation rate has increased from 35% to 40.8%, which is a 5.8% increase. For Latino students or Latinx students, that graduation rate increased from 32.5% to 39.2%. So that's a 6.7 percentage point increase in that rate. It reduced what was a 2.5 percentage point gap to 1.6 percentage points.
Wow.
That's the direction that we want to continue to evolve. It's, I think, one of the better indications that I can see that as we have transformed from a predominantly white institution to now predominantly student of color institution, we are doing some things right for our students. But I'll just emphasize that this is anything but a finished product. This is part of a college in process of transformation. And this is some of the best evidence that we have right now to indicate that some of the things that we are doing are the right things. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tomas. That was really, really appreciate you sharing all that information, and really exciting to see it working and showing that, that's 10 years in the making. So we're gonna flip and go to a college and folks that are not at the same place. Maggie and Allison, I know when we met, you said, we're just getting started with our work. So I guess I'll turn to you both and answer, what do you hope to accomplish with Guided Pathways at your college? And how does that fit in with your focus on increasing equity at Bellevue? And I'll let Maggie start, since you look like you're ready to go and unmuted.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Thanks for asking us. So what do we hope to accomplish with this? Well, I think from Davis's presentation, we've seen that the last year has been tremendously difficult for community college students, especially. It once again emphasizes that we're working with the most vulnerable students in the higher ed system. So essentially what we've been doing for years at Bellevue College before we started this work, and still to some extent, is taking those most vulnerable students and essentially requiring them to go and seek the help that they need in order to complete. So we don't have any mandatory orientation, we don't have mandatory advising, and so students are given a worksheet leading to a degree, perhaps if they're able to find it on the website. And we don't provide the structure for them to help them figure out what they want to do in life and how to get there. So we are trying to build up those structures as part of this work. We've started to pilot, thanks to Christina Ibarra, one of our colleagues, who's been working for 2 years with a lot of other faculty on campus on developing a freshman year experience course that's now required as part of that Associate in Arts and Sciences DTA. And so students are going to have an opportunity, structured opportunity to figure out what their strengths are and what their interests are, and explore possible careers, look at questions about their own identity, and then create an academic and a financial plan to help them to succeed. And that's already been piloted in a few sections. So that's one of our first steps to helping students, giving them some guidance, not just expecting them to figure this out on their own. And I think that providing that clear guidance and that structure, especially for the students that we know are the most vulnerable, has really been a great selling point, and enabled us to create faculty buy-in around this too, which was a big part of our work in the first year, because probably like many of your institutions, if faculty aren't involved in this work, it's not going anywhere. Bellevue doesn't operate top down particularly well. So I'll let Allison step in here too.
Sure. One of the areas in Davis's presentation that kind of was impactful for me was when you had talked about how the transfer AAs are only valuable if students apply those credits towards something in their major field of interest. And so we've really been focusing on building our course mapping process, but in every single area would, programs, so what we're calling focus areas, because we just have different names for programs. And since the beginning of that, we've been really intentional about putting equity at the core of the entire process. We're developing program maps for many of the focus areas, which engages about 120 faculty members. So we have about 3 to 5 faculty member teams. Now that's enough for us to have an opportunity to kind of help change the culture of our college. As we build this course map, we're also having them engage in activities that will have them think about equity, right, at the core of the course map. So from the beginning, when we were thinking about the instructions that we were going to give faculty, we developed those course maps with with equity principles in mind, right? So for example, are courses just on that course map for students based on tradition, what we think that students should take in that field? Let's not do that anymore. Let's look at it with the endpoint in mind. Let's look at what are the jobs that our students right now are going to want if they want a career in that particular area. Right? We just have a general DTA at our college, but let's start them early so that they'll be successful, right? If they decide to transfer to a four-year institution. And so having them look at possible careers, which a lot of transfer area faculty, haven't done that in a long time, but using that in order to think about their outcomes, right? The KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that students need in order to be successful in that area. And then thinking about our courses with respect to those KSAs, right? And having them also consider things like, will jobs in those areas that we've considered in the course map, will they provide the students with that social and economic mobility, right? So considering all of those things, or are there gatekeeper courses or what are being called gateway or restrictive courses that prevent certain students from entering into that particular discipline? Right. So once all of these faculty, they're kind of in the process now of developing these initial drafts while thinking about some of those equity principles. We even laid out in kind of the second part of it, having them do an equity reflection. So now that they have this first draft, let's have them think about what we used a really good resource from the Center for Urban Education at USC. They have this graphic with the difference between equality, equity, and diversity. Right? We have faculty reflect on that. What is the difference between those terms? Then we have them look at our completion and success data with respect to particular intro courses, and then have them disaggregate the data by race and ethnicity. And then we ask questions that have them think about those courses, right? And who are the students that are being successful? Who are the ones that are not being successful in these courses? And then they have discussions within their discipline areas, their focus areas on these, and then that helped them to be able to do some different things on their course maps, right, on their program maps. What are some more supportive activities that we can add there, since we're not getting these particular sets of students being successful in those courses, for example. Faculty gave us really good feedback that this was really valuable for them in terms of having these discussions together as it's related to developing these course maps. And for us, I think we are really hopeful that this is shifting our culture even more towards being more equity-centered and more equity-minded.
Wow, Allison, very, very exciting work. I particularly love hearing about showing faculty the data from their classes. I imagine that's got to open up some eyes to connect the dots there. So very exciting to hear about that. We only have 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna pose one last question, and hopefully we can do a round robin and allow for everybody to respond, which is one of the key takeaways that I heard from Davis is that a theme to guided pathways is that it's about removing barriers and increasing supports for students. That is inclusive of advising, right? So there's the removal of barriers to make it easier and inputting of more navigational support. So I will leave those two as an option for response in your perspective, particularly thinking of our students. Is there a particular barrier that for you, you're like, if that just wasn't there? And Jade, I heard you talk about dual credit, like you didn't even know that that was there. So you didn't have the advising, but you also weren't even able to access it. So I guess I'm posing from your perspective, whether it's a barrier that needs to be removed at a statewide level or an additional advising or navigational support, what stands out for you as really the most important thing as we leave, all the audience members that are here listening today, when we think about those two components, I oversimplify, there's a lot more, it's very complex, but removing barriers and adding in navigational supports. What does that look like? What is the advice? What should advising look like? What do you wish you would have had, Jade and Sierra? And maybe we can start with you.
That's a great question. I personally and anecdotally would not have made it this far in my college experience without my advisor, because she really helped to narrow my focus and to identify my skill sets as far as my educational pathway went. I didn't decide on a major until my last quarter of community college. That was huge. That in itself is a barrier that is subjected to each student. What major am I going to go in even? But for me, the first step is always like taking down and like making space for that, new or revised way of being. So I think just taking down the obstacle or for me, the obstacle is the expectation that the student knows what they want when they go into college. I think that's really common for administrators and faculty to kind of just assume that when students go into college, they know what they want. We don't. We don't. We're still figuring it out. So I would say that that's like the biggest obstacle first, is like kind of taking away all the excess and like really presenting students when they start the community college experience with, this is where you can go from here. Now that you're here, these are the different options that you have. That would have made my experience probably more focused, more energetic, and would have really cut away a lot of dead weight in my consideration for my college experience. So thank you for the opportunity. I'll pass it on to Sierra.
Yeah, I've been in school for 7 years, and when I graduate with my bachelor's next year in June, it will be my 8th year of college. Yeah, my mom always jokes that she's gonna call me Dr. Sierra when I graduate. It's just been a long journey, and a lot of that had to do with poor advising. And I think like I love the guided pathways, like I could rave about it all day. But I also wish that advisors had the opportunity to do something similar, to kind of learn where like hyper marginalized students are coming from. And so they can help guide them that way. And so I personally feel like a lot of it needs to come with not only educating, the students, but also educating the staff and the faculty. That's just my personal experience, and it's something I've always wanted. I think it would really help advisors and student relationships to kind of learn from each other and learn where they want to go, instead of just like telling them where they should go based off of the system that's in place that's failing students. So yeah, yeah.
So well said. Wow. Yeah, Sierra and Jade, I don't be surprised if you get a lot of people asking if they can hire you after this panel. I see all of the chats blowing up. So just shout out to our students who, thank you so much for joining and contributing and sharing your experience. Any other responses from Allison, Tomas, or Maggie to thinking about removal of barriers, and even in response to what Jade and Sierra just said about advising? How are you all thinking about that?
Well, I'm going to jump on something that Sierra said, not just about advising, but about faculty, because, ultimately a lot of this comes down to the relationship between their students and their instructor. So the importance of faculty professional development, I think, if a student has a bad experience with one teacher in their first quarter, that can be the end of their college experience. So we really need to pay much more attention to faculty professional development, and like advising, there need to be some requirements around that. So when I was dean, I used to say, if I wouldn't put my own child in that classroom, why am I putting somebody else in there? So I think that's a really important piece that we can't forget about.
I also wanted to mention the importance, both Sierra and Jade talked about kind of the mentorship or the touch point where somebody reached out to you and you finally, that was a turning point for you, right? In terms of getting that experience. Now, most of our students don't get that experience, right? So how do we build a system that will allow almost every, or hopefully every student to get that experience somewhere along the way. And we can't put it all on advisors because, like at our school, it's a 1 in 900 ratio, right? How can one advisors meet with 900 students? It has to be integrated to the entire system, right? So that students all along the way will be able to get, whether it's a faculty member, whether it's a staff member, whether it's peers, right? Through like peer educators, for example, where they will get that experience of allowing them to think about their identity, think about their careers, and do it in an expedited way, right? So that it doesn't take, 7 or 8 years necessarily, right? And so we think about that all the time. How do we, as we do these program ramps that I mentioned, how do we make sure that we're integrated with student services so that advisors and orientation personnel are talking with faculty, and faculty are able to look at it and give individual instruction to students as well, that it's a whole integrated system. And so thank you, both Sierra and Jade, for helping me, to really think about that even more and know the importance of that work.
Well, I just want to encourage all of our attendees to give a round of applause and thank you to all of our panelists, Sierra, Jade, Allison, Tomas, Maggie, and a special thanks to Davis for joining and sharing all of the incredible information today. We are just about at time, so I just wanted to wrap up and say this is actually our last scheduled Pave the Way for the year. We're going to take a little summer hiatus to acknowledge the exhaustion from the pandemic and just hopefully encourage everybody to rest, rejuvenate, and come back to take care of yourselves. We will be, as I said, we will be posting this up on our website with the final presentation from Davis. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can contact us and we are happy to connect you with any of our panelists today, unless the panelists want to put their own contact information in the chat. I also encourage that. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to all of our attendees and all of our panelists for joining us in our last Pave the Way. And we'll hopefully see you in person at our future Pave the Way events to continue the conversation and to continue the work. So thank you all. We always run out of time and it's so hard to end.
Damn, Sierra and Jade, there's an academic vice president position